It's really great you're able to join us for our center launch this evening. I'm really pleased to have so many people here, in fact. I'm Gabriele Durrant, the Director of NCRM, the Key Infrastructure Investment of ESRC and UKRI, and I'm Professor of Social Statistics and Survey Methodology at the University of Southampton. We're celebrating tonight the launch of the new phase of NCRM, and we have received funding since 2004 in a number of phases, in fact, and this new phase started at the beginning of this year and is currently for 5 years. In terms of our program tonight, I will start by introducing the new phase of NCRM, and then I will hand over to Professor Dave Martin and Dr. Eva Nedbalova, who will introduce the new NCRM design and web portal. I'm really pleased that tonight we have two key speakers, Alison Park, Director of Research at the ESRC. She will give a presentation on the future of research methods from a funder's perspective. Prior to joining ESRC, Alison was the Director of Closer at UCL, and before that, Alison led a research team at Knudsen Social Research, where she oversaw the conduct of a number of key government and academic studies. Alison was also awarded the CBE for services to social sciences in 2018. I'm really pleased tonight that we will also see the launch of our new In Conversation video podcast series with an interview with Professor Dorling from the University of Oxford. And the interview is conducted by Professor Vernon Gayle from Edinburgh, co-director of NCRM. It's fantastic to have Danny here. He's the Halford Mackinder Professor of Geography at the University of Oxford, and his broad portfolio of research concerns social inequalities in housing, health, employment, education, and poverty. So really wide range. And he has written a large number of books and has really a prolific academic output. Danny's new book is Slowdown, and we will hear more about this work in the actual conversation later. Throughout our launch, please use the live chat function here on YouTube to provide comments, feedback, ask any questions. We, that is myself and Professor Mark Elliott from the University of Manchester, Deputy Director of NCRM, we will respond to your feedback, queries, comments, and so on in the live chat. So please start typing away. Also, Alison and Danny are here with us tonight. Well, I've come prepared, and I hope you will be able to celebrate with us. So go and get yourself also a glass of sparkling wine or a cup of tea. It's a center launch. I really hope you will be able to enjoy this evening. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce you to the new phase of the National Centre for Research Methods and to this new remit. The NCRM is basically 3 core universities, Southampton, Manchester, and Edinburgh, and there are 3 internationally leading centres of methodological excellence and expertise. And in this new phase, we are joined by 9 strategically selected centre partners, effectively across the UK, to deliver geographical, disciplinary, and methodological diversity. So I'm really pleased that those centre partners have been able to join us. We've got a vibrant and diverse team of methods experts here from Southampton University, from Manchester here on your left, and from the University of Edinburgh here on your right. And of course, we've got a really active and engaging IT and admin team, and I really hope you will be able to join us at some point and meet us actually in person. There are 3 building blocks of NCRM, and they're interacting. So first of all, there is engagement and collaboration as the sort of foundation, and very much at the core of what we are doing. Also then the base is good practice and sharing good practice, and this will then feed into the actual delivery of our courses, resources, events, and all of our activities. And as I said, all of these activities, all of these 3 building blocks are interacting with each other. At the core of NCRM, at this new phase, we've got engagement and collaboration. We are starting here with the Data Resources Training Network that includes, for example, UKDS and others. We've got the various ESRC investments, for example, the DTPs, various research grants, center grants, and so on, of course, that we are going to interact with much more than probably in the past, because the remit of NCRM is very much with a focus on engagement and bringing together methodological expertise and providing training. Also, our outreach is towards non-academic stakeholders, including government, but also business and industry, and also going actually beyond the social sciences. Also, of course, with some international contacts as well. Then we've got two pillars of our activities. One is the innovation pipeline. Both of these activities will lead into strategically informed training and provide good practice. So the innovation pipeline is the first one of those two pillars, led by Professor Mark Elliott from the University of Manchester. And we will be conducting a whole range of horizon scanning, systematic methodological audits and so on, running innovation fora, so events bringing really together various methods, representatives trying to identify and work on emerging needs, also aiming to identify training needs, analysis and gaps in the provision of training. And this will of course lead to us sharing good practice in terms of short courses, autumn schools, online resources, and so on. The second pillar is pedagogic research. That is a research program led by Professor Mel Lind from the University of Southampton. And here we will be conducting pedagogic research, systematic reviews, and of course will be in a static and continuous dialogue with trainers, leading into various short courses, online resources on pedagogy, publications, quick start guides. Some of them are already available on our website, so please have a look. We will have train the trainer events and various other activities in this area. So key is training resources and activities, really at the core, a comprehensive training program of cutting edge training in core and advanced methods, not just covering qual and quant methods, but also obviously mixed methods, digital and creative methods, and so on. Face-to-face events we've normally planned, but also of course a whole range of online and blended learning activities. And all of these activities are across disciplines, so really also reaching beyond also the social sciences. We've got other activities such as autumn schools, research methods, training fairs, also training bursaries available to support training, and as I said already, a number of events, collaborative events, innovation fora, and so on. The innovation fora, we will be shortly giving out a call for people to input on that as well. So key points, our strategy expands really NCRM training in new and exciting directions. We build on track record of success and will continue to deliver a high quality training program. We have the flexibility to respond to new and emerging needs, and that's obviously very topical in the current provision. So we will be working on how methods change across time and how they change based on demanding needs, challenges, and opportunities. Please, how can you get involved? Visit our website, sign up to our social media accounts, explore our courses and online learning resources on our website. And also please get involved in methodological debates. We will be conducting from time to time interviews with key training stakeholders and work collaboratively. So please get involved in that, also from a more strategic point of view. And any suggestions or ideas you have, we are really keen to hear from you. Please send us an email on info@ncrm.se.uk, or of course now please use the live chat function to get in contact with us, and we'll try to respond to that and also certainly keep a record of the suggestions received. Now I would like to hand over to Dave, Martin and Eva to present the new functionality of the website.
Hi, I'm David Martin, one of the co-directors of the National Centre for Research Methods.
Hi, I'm Eva Nedbalova, the Communication Manager of NCRM.
We want to tell you about the new NCRM training portal, which will be launched later in summer 2020.
Since 2004, the National Centre for Research Methods, funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, has been a leading provider of research methods training and support to the UK social science community.
Our website has been a core part of that mission and has undergone periodic redevelopments, including featuring our many brilliant partners and research projects, as well as reflecting continuous changes in web technology and use.
In January 2020, we commenced a new phase of NCRM, focused on research methods training. ESRC's specification included a new research methods training portal, which will incorporate the new visual branding for the centre.
At the start of the year, we undertook a user consultation survey and interviews to better understand what users wanted from the NCRM online experience. We'd really like to thank you if you participated in these and have helped shape our ideas. The results of the survey are now available on our website. Users told us that they would like a more consistent modern design with a new search facility and made many helpful detailed suggestions. However, they really valued major website features such as the training and events database, publications and online learning resources, and wanted to see these retained.
Working with our design agency, Recognition, we are now preparing to launch the new portal. Some changes, such as the new search function, have been implemented and tested on the current website design, while work on the new structure and visual appearance has been undertaken in parallel. The new design features a color spectrum reflecting the wide range of methods and disciplines that fall within NCRM's remit and will be reflected in all print and online channels.
The new portal design is based on a series of tiles, which is well suited to the many areas of the NCRM portal which contain listings of projects or resources. Users asked for clearer signalling of the many ways that NCRM can help them, and this will be featured in a new About Us guide. The ever-popular training and events database features top centre, containing a unique portfolio of training from NCRM and its partners, all of whom have been making huge efforts to move training online during the global COVID-19 pandemic. The new site also features direct access to our online learning resources, including the extensive video and audio collections, which are being restructured to make navigation easier. Following the launch of the portal, we will begin making use of a Moodle online learning platform to support the delivery of our online courses.
The new Methods News page not only has an upgraded design, but also represents new opportunities for you to engage with us. These include the opportunity to contribute your methodological news by submitting your articles via the Contribute button. This will then come to us, and we will be in touch with you to discuss the publication of your blog post. The second interactive opportunity is the new comment section underneath each blog post, where you will be able to comment and discuss with other readers. We will retain the subscribe to our mailing list function, and our subscribers will keep receiving a monthly methods news update into their mailboxes.
NCRM hosts the ESRC's Restore repository of former research methods websites, many of which continue to see substantial use. And this collection will now be cleanly integrated into the new portal, with users able to easily access the individual resources.
And we are aware from web analytics that more than a quarter of our visitors are using mobile devices to access the site, and this proportion is steadily growing. So usability on these devices has been another key consideration to the new portal design.
For those looking for familiar elements from the existing website, the top menu continues to offer direct access to all areas of our content, including methods research, which will serve as a repository of our past research projects and a space for new associated methodological projects.
We are looking forward to making the new research methods training portal live.
Hello, I'm delighted to be here to celebrate the launch of NCRM. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about research methods from a funder's perspective. I'll start by saying a little bit about the context to this, so why ESRC cares about research methods and the way in which we've thought about this previously. So those of you from the UK will hopefully be aware that ESRC, the Economic and Social Research Council, is one of a number of research councils that sit under an umbrella body called UK Research and Innovation, and ESRC invests well over £180 million a year into social science research and training within the UK. The context for us in terms of research methods is very simple. It's that methodological excellence underpins robust, impactful, high quality social science. And for that reason, research methods are a cornerstone of what we do. And that's illustrated very clearly in our delivery plan, which we published a couple of years ago. The way in which we have thought about and funded this in the past can be divided into two sort of broad categories. So the first is money that's been spent specifically on funding for methods work, so funding to encourage methodological innovation and development. Sometimes that's taken the form of specific research calls aimed at methods. So all of the little pictures you can see on the right-hand side of the screen are examples of very specific methodological experiments that we funded through a call a couple of years ago. But it's important to acknowledge that we also routinely are funding methodological experimentation and development through our other grants as well. Many of our large grants and many of our centres are routinely having to grapple with methods related and relevant issues. So it's not just all being funded through a specific methods lens. The second way in which we think about methods is really by reflecting on the training and capacity building needs within the community. So here, a lot of thought in the past about how can we provide training and support for people at different stages in their research careers. And that's where organisations like NCRM are so important. But then increasingly, we're also really thinking about what are the research methods skills requirements at that very early stage in someone's career. And so what does that mean in terms of thinking about PhD training and training for early career researchers? Then in terms of thinking about where we go next, a couple of observations, if you like, about that really help shape our thinking. So the first one is pretty obvious. It's that many of the major social challenges that face us now need research that's interdisciplinary, and it involves other sectors beyond academia. So if you think about, the big challenge of our time, coronavirus is one example, climate change would be another one. Neither of those are issues that are ever going to be addressed by a single set of disciplines. They require interdisciplinary research. And so that is one lens through which we've really thought about our research methods portfolio. The second is the very, again, equally obvious point that research methods need to evolve, they need to change. And in particular, they need to keep pace with technological development, both in data production and in analytics. So this might mean thinking about what those developments mean in terms of research design, in terms of how you think about research quality, as well as how you think about the kinds of data that might be available and how one analyses it. So what does that mean now in terms of how we're thinking about research methods in the future? One really key area obviously relates to thinking about new partnerships and research opportunities. And so a few things to flag here for you. Firstly, given that we're here to celebrate the launch of NCRM, to really signal their absolutely vital role in coordinating investment in research methods training and really helping ESRC think about what it does here. We're really looking forward to NCRM helping develop a training program that fills in some very key strategic gaps, and in thinking about what good practice looks like and how one can identify and implement and share it. We've also got specific funding pots set aside for funding research methods development. So some of you will be aware of the Research Methods Development Grant call that closed I think just a few weeks ago now. Fantastic response to it, and we certainly have flagged that we will be carrying out another call along these lines in the future. Probably the key point to make about that specific call is that it was very much designed after reflecting on the point I made earlier about that need to grapple with how one thinks about research methods from an interdisciplinary perspective. So that was one of the really key highlights in that call. And then finally, there is certainly potential for further methods calls or training and support calls that will focus on specific needs where we have identified them. So many of you will be familiar with some of the additional support that we've given to trying to boost quantitative skills. We're just starting off a piece of work now thinking about skills in relation to data-driven research. And so that is probably another area where we're going to be investing more in the future. And then the final area I wanted to flag was just thinking about new forms of data and improved data resources. So there is ongoing work within ESRC to reflecting on what I think is broadly referred to as new forms of data, new and emerging forms of data. So data that comes out of transactional information held by commercial companies, social media data, the Internet of Things, etc., etc. Huge potential, but also a lot of challenges about how can people safely access that kind of data? What are the pros and cons of using it? How does it compare with other forms of data? So that's an area where we are still scoping out what we hope could be a major investment in this space. And it will very much learn from the second bullet point down, ADR UK, which is Administrative Data Research UK. That is a major investment in ESRC, of ESRC, that has been very successful in cracking some of the challenges of how do you facilitate safe access by academics to data collected by government, by public services through their daily engagement with citizens. Huge potential there to really crack some important questions, but also a number of challenges from a research methods front as well. So that's another area where there's a lot of work doing of immediate relevance to research methods. And then finally, I just wanted to flag, and again, I suppose this picks up on the point I made earlier, that we're trying not to just think of research methods through that single research methods lens. It's something that's going on all the time. So the ESRC funds some fantastic longitudinal studies. They're having to grapple with these issues all the time, as are many of the other data investments that we make. So that is where I wanted to finish. On a personal note, I suppose I just wanted to reflect on my own career and just how incredibly embedded thinking about research methods has been throughout that. So I started in my research career more years ago than I care to remember, but at a time when the big methodological development was the move from paper-based interviewing to computer-assisted interviewing. And that, as I'm sure you can imagine, threw up a whole range of methodological challenges and opportunities. And more recently, I've been very involved in sort of working with longitudinal studies in particular and thinking about how can they benefit from new data collection opportunities without jettisoning the value of the data they collect then and how that compares with what they've done in the past. So I hope that illustrates that I'm certainly very aware of the importance of research methods to everything that the ESRC does. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I see it really as the cornerstone of the high quality, impactful social science that we fund. Thank you.
I recently completed your new book, Slowdown, and I'd describe you as the man who sounded the trumpet at the walls of Jericho. In the book, you document a convincing dossier of evidence to support the idea that we are living in an era of deceleration. Can I invite you first to summarise some of this evidence?
I mean, the strongest evidence for this is that I wasn't looking for it. I was actually looking for things that were speeding up, because we know people are very excited about the idea of acceleration. So I thought, oh, I'll just look at lots of global data sets and I'll find out what's speeding up. The evidence is that I could find hardly anything speeding up. And lots of things are still going up. Average GDP in the world is going up, life expectancy is going up, the average, well, actually the average height of people isn't going up, but hardly anything is accelerating. In fact, to make my point, there are just 4 things accelerating of the main global data sets. They are the number of, well, 4 things that were accelerating. until March 2020. Number of graduates worldwide going to university, the amount of carbon that we were polluting the atmosphere with, the number of air flights we were taking, some of us, but overall they were accelerating in total, and the temperature of the planet was not just rising but accelerating. Everything else I could measure was slowing.
Thank you. The subtitle of the book is The End of the Great Acceleration and Why It's Good for the Planet, for the Economy and Our Lives. A message that I took away from the book was that, that this era of deceleration presents a unique opportunity for societies to stabilise their economies, decrease inequality and call for a moratorium on environmental change. Would you like to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, one problem is that we tend to think of increases and even acceleration as a good thing, or because it's something that our parents and grandparents were used to. They were used to technological acceleration, invention after invention after invention, things becoming possible that weren't even imagined before. They were used to the material conditions of life, not just improving, but improving at a speed that was actually an acceleration. However, it is patently obvious that accelerations are temporary things. They cannot carry on forever. You know, but nevertheless, governments have had targets such as a 2% growth in GDP every year, which of course, if it were to occur, would be a larger growth each year than the year before, because it would be 2% of something that had grown. Everything has to stop accelerating at some point. It looks as if much of human life on the planet now, although still at a great speed, is not accelerating as it was, and that can give you hope for the future. And I wanted to emphasize this because in particular my younger students, these are undergraduates, 18, 19, 20, a lot of them really do think it's game over environmentally, think it's game over in terms of out of control capitalism and so on. But observing a slowdown, I think, can give you hope for the future.
Thanks. And when I was a young lecturer, I read James Gluck's book, Faster, The Acceleration of Just About Everything. And Gluck suggests, if I remember rightly, that everything from our money to our personal relationships will just move faster and faster, especially for the millennials, I guess, or people you might call Generation Y. But 2 decades later, your work sort of forensically dismantles this thesis.
It does. And it was, I mean, he was writing some time ago. But looking at it now, and it's much easier now, you can see that, for instance, the population acceleration of the planet, that ended around about 1968. GDP began to decelerate, still rising, but decelerate in the 1950s. The number of relationships people have has almost certainly decelerated compared to what they got up to before. And it's difficult to persuade people of this. Not least because we work in universities, and part of the stock in trading universities, particularly the science and medical side, is to say, look at us, we're inventing more new things than ever before, we're inventing more cures, aren't we great? But actually, the really big medical interventions have been done. The Human Genome Project is great, but it's not going to be a panacea. It tells you that chance is much more important than we thought in terms of our lives. And when it comes to science, science isn't going to give us what science fiction said it would. It isn't going to give us teleportation. It isn't going to give us the kind of promises that we were given as children. Whereas for our parents and grandparents, it did. It took people to the moon. You know, that kind of thing is coming to an end. It's not an end of history. It's an end of material expansion of the kind that we've been used to. It doesn't mean that we won't get great change in future. I end the book talking about great social changes. But the idea that our children will live radically different material lives to us is, I think, wrong.
So, yeah, so to what extent would you say then that the idea of slowdown is sort of counter-cultural, because we've lived in a world of sort of endless economic growth, and this is assumed to be very essential for our kinds of society?
It is. I do find it odd. I think it must be that now is the time that this becomes more obvious. It's not me, it's a time of this. Because if you look at economic growth, the 1960s had slower growth than the 50s, the 70s slower than the 60s, the 80s slower than the 70s, and so on, every decade till now. But each time we blame something like the oil shock in the 70s, or the recession of the 80s, or the crash of 2008. We blamed an individual event rather than saying actually the long-term progress is towards the slowdown. So we've had something get into our brains that said that speeding up is normal. I did look, of course, as you do as an academic, I looked at other people's work.
Yeah.
And I looked at books, more recent books about acceleration. And my favourite one was one which talked a great deal about theories of acceleration, but didn't have any empirical evidence until it came to the first piece of evidence. I think it's cited in the book. There were two.
Mm-hmm.
One was the speed at which films were being cut and the average frame length. And the second one, which of course isn't speeding up now, but did in the past. And the second one was the speed at which politicians in the Norwegian parliament spoke. Right. Now, if you're having to use that as your example of empirical evidence that the world is speeding up, you really are clutching at straws.
Yeah, that's it's great. And I remember in the book you used the imagery of the brakes being applied to a speeding train, and I quite like that idea. What sort of gave you that sort of put you onto that particular analogy?
Well, okay, it does two things. One is the train is still going forward. Even when the brakes are on, the train is still going forward. Just as GDP is still rising worldwide, population is still rising worldwide. So you've got to understand the brakes being on doesn't mean that you're going backwards. You're still going forward, but you're slowing down. Yeah. The second thing, and really important, and you can almost feel it. I can feel it because you've been in the car with the brakes on. And you know what it feels like when the brakes go on. You're still going forward, but your body goes backwards. Yeah. And if you brake too fast, your body goes forward, and you feel dislocated. Whereas when you were speeding, I mean, again, think about it in a plane crossing the Atlantic. When you're speeding across the Atlantic in a plane, you feel still. It feels normal. It's the slowing down that feels abnormal, even though what is normal is to be still. So it was trying to use our bodies in our sense and to explain how we got so used to speed.
Yeah. Well, it's very good. So can I ask you about a couple of very specific parts of the book? I hadn't considered the slowdown in the growth of Wikipedia pages, so I thought that was quite a sort of thing. I just imagined it was continuing. So I think that was quite an illuminating small nugget. But so maybe you could mention that. But also in your book, you point to some of the pay cuts of the FTSE 100 companies, where I know you've previously written and investigated and written a lot about high-paid jobs, especially elite jobs. What are your current views?
Okay, well, on Wikipedia, this was looking for the slowdown in the growth of big data. People say there's more data created every second than the second before. I thought I'd look for data which was useful, as opposed to kind of the enormous rubbish we're collecting of data. And it may be sacrilege in academia to say, but I think Wikipedia is the single most useful thing on the internet. Collectively produced, collectively edited. Hopefully, it'll carry on being improved. One thing that makes me think it will carry on being improved is, as I think about 8 years after it was created, the speed at which it grew began to slow. And then there was a little jump in 2015 when people created a thing called stubs, where you could do sub-definitions in it. But again, it slowed. Why did it slow? Despite the fact that there are growing numbers of nerds around the world who will happily edit Wikipedia pages. It didn't slow because of a lack of nerds. It slowed because of a lack of things that needed an explanation that anybody was ever going to look up. There is a limited amount of knowledge. We don't suddenly create more knowledge. Suddenly we create more knowledge, but not to this enormous accelerating rate. Just because more of us are looking. Secondly, you ask about pay. I've been looking at inequality for about 20, maybe 30 years. And mainly I began looking because it was rising in the 80s in Britain when I was first studying. Recently, last 5-6 years, inequality in pay in the majority of OECD countries has fallen slightly. Most of the world has fallen slightly. It's not very fashionable to say it, but for somebody who goes on and on about income inequality and how bad it is, I think we have to notice when the falls do begin to happen. And they have, and they've begun to occur before the pandemic was even known. That's quite important.
So you finished the manuscript for Slowdown, and I sort of wonder, well, I was going to say you finished it BC, i.e. before COVID. Can I ask you to speculate on how you might have concluded if the deadline had been a year later or even 18 months later in the sort of AC period, the sort of after COVID period?
I can tell you that because the publisher just yesterday said they're going to do a paperback and it will come out at the start of 2021. And can I do a preface about COVID? So well, I've only had a day to think about it. So, I mean, COVID is interesting in terms of a slowdown because it is an example of something that rapidly accelerated, then slowed down and then fell, and now we're extremely interested in what happens next. I do have parts of the book which do talk about previous pandemics, where you have to go right back to the Black Death to find previous pandemics that actually resulted in long-term economic change. So the 1918, 1951, 57, 1968, 69 pandemics came and went without huge economic effect. But this time we were already slowing down when the pandemic hit. So I don't think many people think that the effects of this will really be that short term. And of course, we turned our economies off, which is very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to sort of stay to talk a little bit about activism and politics, really. So there are many people who in UK social sciences and social sciences in other countries that believe in value neutrality in social science research. We always see you as a very much a person who's got a very sort of activist streak within their work as well. So what are your current views on that sort of issue?
You're talking to me in the morning after Oriel College, Oxford, finally agreed that the statue will go. So it's interesting to, again, if you don't know what about this, the Statue of Rhodes, it's part of this chain of university I'm working. No school in Oxford would have a statue of a racist on its wall, but for some reason the university I'm working felt it was okay to have one. Everybody has political values. Anybody who tells you they don't are fooling themselves or trying to fool you. There is no such thing as value neutrality. Keeping silent is a political act, which is the thing that have been angering me recently in my university. Not a single head of an Oxford University college spoke out against the college publicly that had the racist statue. That's a political act. I just think we all have politics. I got this at the age of 18. I was taught political geography by Peter Taylor in Newcastle. And I'll remember this lecture to the day I die from Peter Taylor as an 18-year-old. And him saying, everything is political. Everything from how the rubbish on the streets is collected through to what kind of job you're going to end up in. There is nothing which is not political. And I guess he convinced me in that lecture.
Yeah, thank you. So your work is, I would say, having read a lot of your work over the years, it's characterized by very detailed empirical work. And I wouldn't say, though, it was applied research. I wouldn't use that term, but I would describe it as locating in sociological terms, in terms of sort of R.K. Merton's middle range theory. So I would argue that your work tends to seek out empirical regularities. What sort of description, how would you describe it, though?
I think that would be fair enough. It's kind of informed curiosity. I'm looking for things that might surprise people. And sort of by definition, if the thing I think will surprise people, the automatic reaction to something that surprises you is to not believe it, is to disbelieve it. So you then need a whole load of references and evidence to say, no, really, just, when I say inequality is falling, I can point to numerous things that do that. So I think I'm partly the last of an old breed of academics from an era where we didn't have to have theory chapters in our PhD, and we didn't actually have to say what methodology we were using, where we had a great deal more freedom than younger academics or PhD students have now, not to have to pigeonhole ourselves. And the other thing I should say is I was always very bad with words, even though I've written lots of books. I wasn't good with words. Numbers I always found easy, and you do tend to gravitate to what it is you find easiest to do.
Okay, so can I steer the conversation then towards social theory? And I'd really like to know what your sort of position on the analytical value of the sort of what's sometimes called the grand theorists, you know, sort of, and where some of the sort of insights or otherwise might be from the sort of post-linguistic turn, or whatever phrase people tend to use for it now.
Of these things, it's funny because you talk to people in English, you know, in humanities, who will tell you, oh yes, we went through this 20 years earlier.
Right.
Social science, being slightly skeptical, but I'm not a fan of people trying to have grand theories. I happen to think that Karl Marx had a very, very good grand theory for his time, head and shoulders above anything before and after, but for his time, you know, a new explanation of a new time that hadn't been done. But I think grand theories that hold a particular truth come along very, very rarely, and there's too much of a desperation of people trying to be the next one who does it. They're not quite as rare, but well, you can look at religions as grand theories. In World Mapper, I drew maps of 32 world religions, and each of those world religions, this World Mapper is a website of things around the world, each of those world religions had a grand theory at its start, its book of the truth. And interestingly, most of them were created at a time of turmoil and great inequality, when they were complaining about the inequality and the turmoil. And if you like, their grand theories that had a huge effect. And I would put Marxism along that if you think about China and USSR and so on in terms of effect. And I just think there's a danger, if that's my idea of grand theory, there's a danger of so many people trying to emulate those kind of epoch-making things.
So you've often, in your work, cautiously advised researchers to consider things that are not measured, as well as things that are measured. And in Slowdown, in the sort of Slowdown epoch, what new forms of data or data series would you like to see the UK, particularly the Research and Innovation, ESRC, UKRI and so on, funding in the next coming period?
Oh, things that are more personal about people's lives, their happiness, their well-being, their contentment, what they feel. Because we have got our standards living up to a certain level where there is no need for people to go cold, there's no need for people to go hungry, although, you know, this week we had to see somebody argue that the Prime Minister would allow them to eat over the summer. But the next set of problems, the next set of big problems in the world, at least in affluent countries, are all about mental well-being, how satisfied you are with your life. Do you feel the need to go flying around the world to go on holiday to make yourself happy? Or can you be happier and feel secure and not feel precarious? You know, that the Prince's Trust, the Prince Charles has a trust, which I think since 2009 has done a survey on the mental well-being of young people in Britain. And this is hardly a radical trust, this is the Prince of Charles Trust. Every year, the level of anxiety amongst young people in Britain is reported as having risen by that trust. So that's the kind of thing I think we should be moving our resources more towards addressing, because it should be entirely possible to give younger people, of whom we've never had fewer young people, we've never given them a better education than we've given them now. How on earth do you do those two things and then leave them in a state of acute anxiety?
Very good points. So I've noticed since lockdown there's been a new cohort of amateur statisticians and data analysts emerging, particularly on TV and on social media. And I noticed lots of people are now drawing graphs and so on. Much of the data analysis in Slowdown is presented as timelines or graphs. What methodological insights can you offer regarding data visualization, not just for us as professional social scientists, but that new cohort of amateur social scientists that seem to be knocking around at the moment?
It is amazing, isn't it? It's really good news. I mean, a huge amount of credit has to be given to ONS. ONS went above and beyond in what they've released on this pandemic. Really took a series of decisions that were clearly internal, as no minister would have understood the complexities. And for 7,201 areas, ONS have told us how many people died every month in care homes and so on. So they flooded the data out there to this army of armchair epidemiologists. And of course, all the standard epidemiologists are also, all of them are looking at COVID because it's new. And the great thing about this is that if there was anything to be seen, it will be found. And they've used the mass. I'm sure they didn't realise. And I'm sure what they did realise was how terrible this was. And they just put the information out there. I didn't think they realised that it would be used by such a wider set of people. So yes, for messages. So interestingly, I've been drawing with complicated diagrams, so the kind of having Slowdown on the pandemic, and these were very popular at first because they showed how much it exploded in 7 countries. But a few weeks ago, we kept on updating the graph, and it became more and more complicated. And then the graph got attacked, I think, by the Financial Times as being far too complicated to understand. And I quite like this because it was actually at the point when the pandemic was too complicated to understand, and the graph that my friend Kirsty and I had produced showed this. It's now all heading down as I speak at the start of June. Methods, I mean, these are just timelines, but they're not much used in the West. That's a technique that comes from Japan I've been using. The only clever thing in the timelines I draw, which makes all the difference, is that I measure the rate of change from one period before, say a week before the date you're interested in, to the week after. And that produces such a different pattern and tells you so much more than measuring change at the precise point you're interested in. So in terms of the pandemic, we can see that it escalated upwards, did a series of loops in different countries, out of control and unpredictable, and then has come down more slowly than it's gone up, and again looped. And the looping is not due to reporting at weekends. It's something about COVID and a coronavirus pandemic, which is different from the influenza pandemics and the kind of thing I'm involved in later today. It's a great big researcher. Later today, we're plotting the comparison to the 1951 flu pandemic with coronavirus, because part of the 1951 flu pandemic may not have been flu. It may possibly have been an early coronavirus. Sorry to go on about it, but it's a way of looking at something. The 1951 pandemic killed far more people in somewhere like Liverpool than this has killed, and more people than 1957. But to see a pandemic nowadays, you can read the reports of it, but you can only really see it in the graphs and the numbers. And interestingly, in terms of qualitative, because we've just lived through this, we have some kind of feeling now. You can feel it in your gut. That looking at the same numbers a year ago, would have been so much more dispassionate. And I quite like having the passion. Now I do wish that. Well, I wish the pandemic hadn't happened. On the other hand, we've gone 50 years since another sharp up and down pandemic like this. It's been a long time since we'd had something quite as devastating as this, and it had to happen at some time.
So thank you. So Danny, I'm an advocate of transparent and reproducible research, and recently I heard you discuss the issue of sharing results and the particular problem of slow speed of peer review process. Would you like to tell us more about your thoughts in this area?
Yeah, I almost always put all the data I use up on the web, but I almost always use sources where I'm allowed to do that, or sort of allowed. Other than mortality data, which I can't, individual records I mostly can't do. It's not just, because you may make mistakes. So you want people to be able to reproduce it to see. It makes you much less likely to make a mistake if you if you know you're putting the data on the web. You know, if you do an extra check, you haven't got it wrong.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to deal with requests for data. You just say it's there. You don't even have to ask me. You know, so it helps with that. Peer review's odd. It's the only thing we've got. We've just gone through this amazing experiment of seeing what happens without peer review. Sometimes several thousand papers a day being released on these preprint servers with this pandemic.
Yeah.
And you know, we have had papers peer reviewed in the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine that have been wrong. So I'm still in favour of peer review. I peer review 2 or 3 papers a week. I don't write many papers nowadays. It's a way of avoiding the researcher's embarrassment, I think. As much as, you know, look for whether they've made an awful mistake. But my strongest views about this are that I do think preprints are brilliant and should go up. And I also think that referees' comments should go up on the web, because journal reviewing can be used as a process for frustrated academics to kind of get out their frustration about life. And there is a bit of bullying that goes on sometimes. And I think a bit more transparency there would be good. You see this more in medical journals, but you don't necessarily have to have the names released, but actually seeing the comments and then seeing the reply and then seeing the referees reply to that, and eventually the paper goes up, I think is a much cleaner thing. Similar to how academics are appointed, say in Iceland or Finland or Norway, where all the CVs are on the web for everybody to see, which would be a bit of a shock in Britain. And all the assessors' reports on who should get the academic job, that's also public information as well. It sort of shows where the world, I think, is heading.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. So just to change track slightly, it's no secret my parents were early windrushers, and my father was a London taxi driver from 1964 to 2012. He was one of the first black men to pass the knowledge. And when I phone him up later and I say, Dad, and he says, "What you've been doing today?" And I say, "Dad, I've been interviewing the Central Line guy." Is how he'll know you, the Central Line guy. He'll remember who you are then. So he'll say to me, "Did you question him on social inequality in the capital, you know, in London?" So I better get one question in that does that, Danny. So your book, if people don't know it, 32 Stops, that chronicled the lives of people living along the 32 stops of the Central Line, illustrated the extent and impact of social inequality in London. Which other tube lines would you have liked to have documented? Or do you have any plan? Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. The first one I would have liked to have done was a lot of work. I did think of trying to walk the Central Line. Right. I worked out that should be months if I was going to take any notice of what was around me on the walk.
Yeah.
I only walked Liverpool Street to Bethnal Green. That was long and interesting enough. The rest of the Central Line first, up towards Enfield and so on, and actually out of London.
And out to Essex and
and a loop. Range Hill is up there. So that would be the first. That would be the first one to do, and then I think probably quite a posh one, the Metropolitan.
Maybe,
just because you know, I'm a university professor now, so I have more in common with the lives of the kind of people who might be coming in from Amersham, and also I think that's the group of people whose views most need to change in future. The people who think that their wages that they're paid, who come in on that tube line. Oh, the other one will be from Waterloo into the city, that really fast little train packed with very angry bankers, is my impression of it. So I'm looking forward to be able to get back onto tube lines. You can tell I enjoy them. I consider being on the London Underground as a form of participant observation. And it's a much more pleasant experience if you think of it as research than if you think of it as, oh my God, how am I going to get from here to there in rush hour?
Okay, yeah, thanks very much. So your output over the last 30 years has been incredibly impressive. And I've heard you also say that you think British academics produce too much research output. What sort of advice do you have then for graduate students and early career researchers?
Yeah, I think I'm partly again a product of my times. My supervisor, Stan Openshaw, was incredibly prolific, one of the most prolific at the 1992 research assessment exercise. Later on, I worked with lots of people, but Ron Johnson, most prolific geographer, and George David Smith in Bristol. It's been over 2,000 academic papers. So I was in a weird bubble of people and time where this kind of productivity was almost presented as normal. It's not. You could get rid of over half of what I've written. You could delete it from history and nothing would change. You know, half of what I have produced has had no impact, wasn't of much use. And so now, of course, it'd be very hard at the time to know what that half was. But I can absolutely tell you half could have gone, and then you could take another half of what's left and happily get rid of that. So the amount of time I could have had to have done other things, it's enormous. The world is full of journals now, full of articles, far too much for people to read. I really hope we're going to move towards two things. One is issues about quality and time, and back to where you might only write a few 2 or 3 journal articles in your lifetime. You know, discovered something about cuckoos that's really important, and you wanted to tell the world about cuckoos. And the other really important thing that will help this is having a flatter, less hierarchical structure in universities, moving them towards being a bit more like schools, seeing tertiary education as tertiary education, not an elevated separate thing for the higher orders, which is what it was. Now that over half of all young people go, you know, we don't expect school teachers to have research careers, even though a few in some of the elitist public schools do. I think the university academic in future to be a job where you can have a life as well and teach well. There should be a lot less emphasis on this absolutely enforced research, you know, almost like whipping people. Where's the new idea? You know, if the number of new ideas in the world is slowing down, what are we doing? Forcing people to write papers when they don't necessarily want to, and something new doesn't come up. I can't believe, I just find it impossible to believe that we will in 10 or 20 years time be having research assessment exercises where we ask this enormous army of people around the world, where is your 4-star intergalactic research that has changed the course of the planet then, without somebody just cracking up in laughter and going, oh, come on, stop it, it's stupid, you know, which, you know, it might be an irreverent view of the ref, but honestly, it's time to bring this one to an end, in my view. I know my colleagues, something like the ref, and the ref helped get rid of corrupt practices before, but it's been fun. I've enjoyed writing lots of things, but I do wish I'd had more time. There's a guitar behind me. I can't play it, you know. I do wish I'd written less and I could actually do things like play the guitar.
Okay, so thank you very much. So we're coming to the end of time. The final thing is my goddaughter Lola will be fantastically impressed when I tell her that I've been in conversation with a man who's met an internet time lord, which is we won't tell people any more about that. They'll have to go forward and read the book to find out what that actually means. So Professor Danny Dorling, thank you for being in conversation with us here at the National Research Methods Centre. Over to you for the final words.
Thank you ever so much for letting me talk about it in myself, and I'm so glad that I'd forgotten I'd written about the Time Lord. I did really meet him. I was about 21 at the time I met the Time Lord. That's all I'll say.
Okay. Right. Danny Dorling, thank you very much.